Hello, Brookside. This is Jason from the facilities team, and I get to do the reset today. A couple weeks ago, I was talking to a longtime Brooksider, and he commented he'd been in the dentist on, I think it was Tuesday of that week, and commented it had been about 2 months since anyone other than his wife had touched him when that dental hygienist had touched him, and how just weird that was. Just how strange these times are, and it made me think of this verse in Matthew 8, one of my favorites, and it starts off in verse 1. It talks about where Jesus, it came down off a mountainside, and the large crowds are following him, and so this is a real time when Jesus is very popular, people clamoring to him for healing. And then we see in verse 2, this man with leprosy comes up to Jesus, and he comes to him and asks him to be healed. And so specifically it says, well, the man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you're willing, make me clean." And so Jesus has a choice at that point. He could have healed him. In fact, the very next passage, we see Jesus heal someone from a distance. He could have just said, healed him, and he could have walked away. But Jesus does something remarkable. Before we look at what Jesus did, though, we got to understand a little about leprosy. All right, leprosy was a very ridiculed disease. It was a disease where the fingers would fall off, the feet would fall off, sometimes the nose would fall off. There'd be lots of bumps. And it was very unsightly disease. In fact, people who had leprosy would walk around saying, "Unclean, unclean," just to let people know that they were unclean and that they need to be avoided. In fact, some documents say that you had to stay 4 cubits away from them. And if you do the math on that, that's about 6 feet. Isn't that interesting? And so you have this man with leprosy, comes to Jesus, wants to be healed, and Jesus has a choice at that point. So what does Jesus do? How does Jesus respond? And it says in verse 3, Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. He said, "I am willing." He said, "Be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. So the key question for me is why? Why did Jesus touch him? He didn't have to. Why? What was the point? What was his logic? What was his reason for touching him? One thing, I think, just a quick side note during this time, is that physical touch is important. All right, we need to connect with people physically. That's important. And I'm a bit of a hypocrite there because I that's not a strong point for me. My wife and kids will probably tell you that. So we need to connect. We need to touch people, and we're all looking forward to this season being over. All right. But second, Jesus cares for the hurting. He could have healed this man with complete unemotion, abstract, but he wanted the guy to feel loved. Imagine walking around perhaps for years, never being touched. You know, this longtime Brooksider was a couple months, and that's just weird and strange. And for some, it's been that long now, and 3 months. But this guy, maybe perhaps years, he wanted to genuinely, Jesus wanted him to know that he was loved. And so he touched him. And Jesus is always discipling, right? There was that large crowd around him. This leper comes to him, perhaps stays at 6 feet away. Jesus has a choice, right? Heal him, walk away, whatever, we don't know. But Jesus makes his choice to touch him. I'm convinced part of that was because of the people that were around him. And he was teaching them. He was showing them. He was telling them, hey, you get involved in people's lives involves engaging. You know, and you're going to be, particularly those disciples around him, you're going to be loving, you're going to be caring for people, you're going to be leading my church. And it's going to be messy at times. You're going to have to get involved in people's lives. That's what ministry is. It's messy stuff. So why is this relevant? What's the point? All right. And the key thing I want to know is, how does God touch me? Right? Because Jesus doesn't really walk around touching people like that. You know, and so how does God touch us? And so one is, first would be through the Bible. Certainly God has given us the Bible to teach us and direct us, right? God has given us the Holy Spirit. It's a key part of our Christian lives. The Spirit directs us. We need to submit to that and listen and be there. God uses circumstances. Certainly God uses music. I think this is part of the struggle for me, is we can't gather together in our large group and just lift our voices to God. That's just I need that. God touches me through that, through preaching, through teaching. And the TV is great, but man, I'm missing the connection with you guys in a large group. But the number one way God touches people is through his children. God uses his children to touch each other. And he impacts, and he wants us to not just see the leper, but touch the leper. One quick thing before I move on here is I just want to say thank you to that longtime Brookside. It represents a group of people who have touched Brookside Church, and they have just invested and they have touched people's lives and built this church that we love and we miss gathering with. And so I just want to say thank you for touching Brookside. So the application then be, well, who are you touching? Like, who are you engaged in, right? Maybe you're struggling in your marriage and you haven't touched each other. Just give each other a hug, right? Who do you need to digitally touch? Phone call, text, Zoom, whatever it might be, right? How can you touch people? How can you engage in people's lives? And don't use this excuse of social distancing to not care and touch people. So that's the key question. Who are you touching? Thanks, Brookside. It's been good connecting, and have a great day.